So of course, by now, everyone should have this memorized as the executive order by which we are functioning, and that our whole purpose is reviewing and developing recommendations. We are not making the actual zoning code changes. This is the task force vision that came from those first two sessions, working through this as a group. The vision for the Newtown recommendation, so that making sure everything touches base with this. And one of these you'll see later going through on the survey. And we did touch on this the last meeting. We'll talk about it again tonight, that there were elements from this. All of these words were put into the survey to just get that feel back from the community. Does this match what they're thinking as well? So that's kind of our litmus test for this task force as well. So we'll go over those results. The last meeting, we talked about the Newtown district structure and should the structure of Newtown district change. And these were the results from our polling. So we said yes and yes with considerations as the largest response. One who said no, and then nobody who said they were unsure at this time. We can all. Then on our second question of should the regulations and processes for development, redevelopment, and or amendments be simplified? This is the one, and don't worry, in tonight's polling questions, I did not use this format because this format did not work as well from the last meeting. But again, this was all of the yes and yes with considerations did come through as a higher value than the no and the onshore. We got into the question of apartment land use. Should the apartment land use be adjusted to align with other county zoning definitions? And just as a reminder from that, we did have a little bit of a breakout discussion of apartment land use in the percentages versus apartment definition, and the definition of what an apartment is. And that's something from the recommendations, and really what came out of that last meeting was to make sure that we're as we get into the developing recommendations, we talk about the definition of apartments and then the potential when we're talking density caps of apartment land use separately, but we'll define it first. From our prior meeting minute approval, as I noted, as we do not yet have quorum, we are doing discussion only, so we will not take our meeting minutes vote at this time. As we have additional members of the task force attending, we'll come back to this slide. So moving into our key elements for discussion, the last time we really hit on the evaluating the Newtown district structure, simplification of regulations, processes, redefining apartment land use, and we moved two of them, reviewing original petitioner role. We moved from our October meeting to this evening. So we wanted to have that. The feeling from the task force is wanting to have that in person as a discussion, and then as well as the expansion of uses and materials and design guidance in Newtown zoning. We moved from last meeting to this meeting because of the just sheer amount of discussion, great discussion. And we always had this December meeting as that overlap between discussion and developing recommendations.
So we're going to talk about this.
Absolutely. That will be our first question this evening. As far as the information request that came from our last meeting, this is just to provide that transparency for everyone, is discuss further clarifications between structure, regulations, and processes to identify the recommendations, and discuss apartments in two separate categories. So I kind of gave it away already, as I mentioned this during the question of definition of apartments and land use percentages as two separate categories. So some other just things that are still within the housekeeping realm of our overall schedule. We are here in that December meeting, task force meeting number 6. By the arrow that you see, this is the combination of the completion of our PSET analysis and the beginning discussions of our developing recommendations. We will have continued developing recommendations meetings in January and February, and that's at the same time. February into March is when that draft report will be started, and a continual iterative process back and forth, because it is truly a report of the work of this committee that we are documenting. We will have that meeting public meeting and another public survey in March. We'll talk about that further when we get into the January, and then the anticipated final report presentation to the county by May. So you've mentioned previously, everything that we're doing is breaking up those major elements, reviewing them individually, providing that relevant case study, discussing what that recommendation might be. Do we want to preserve it, strengthen it, enhance it, or transform it? And then the actual action items and those recommendations to be developed. Looks like something has happened here. Now it has kicked me out of the meeting. Apologies, all this.
Question while you're doing your technical part. Will we be discussing any changes? Will we be specifically discussing any changes to the downtown regulations on how development occurs as well as village centers? It's in 125.
So in terms of the two topics that we're going to be talking about today are going to be original petitioner. And then we're going to be talking about uses, design guidelines, and regulatory standards in Columbia itself. So that interplays within downtown and village centers you were talking about as well. So we'll have discussions around what is currently allowed in those areas, and we can have further discussions basically on.
Yeah, I didn't mean tonight, I meant.
Oh, going forward. Okay. 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 So in terms of, so if you were to look at what Jennifer was presenting, you had, she went through what we discussed in prior meetings, which was the different elements. So that included the village center process, the major minor center redevelopment process. Downtown is in itself a different entity. It has its own master plan. So that master plan is already a process that has already taken place, has gone through. So most of what we're focusing in on is really outside of downtown, but.
By master plan, you mean like an MCP?
There was the 2010, 2010
And then the update. Yeah.
master plans. So there's a master plan for downtown that spells out all the neighborhoods, that ultimate build out of downtown Columbia.
Do we have a quorum yet? No.
We do not yet
I'm
have.
a little concerned because
We did get an email from Nina saying that she is on her way, that she's making.
okay.
So
Can I just make a suggestion?
Yeah.
You know how when you have the virtual meetings, you guys put a calendar invite and then it goes right on the calendar? I think when it's in person, people didn't take note of the date. If we don't have a calendar invite, that's why I sent the email earlier today asking about it. It does seem like we have less people. I'm pretty loud anyway. I don't want, thank you. Thank you, appreciate it.
okay, going forward, we can definitely try to.
I'm just concerned that we'll run into this problem when we have in
That's a
person.
good recommendation. And I think, a lot of people are oriented more towards the calendar
Yeah,
side of things. So, yeah, we can definitely look at doing something like that.
thanks.
No, and thank you for bringing that up as that recommendation. This evening, the only item that has voting is the meeting minutes, the approval of the meeting minutes. But moving forward, as we are developing recommendations and wanting to get concurrence and have that documented for the report, we will absolutely need quorum on each of those. So that is a great point. Thank you. I am reconnected online. And picking back up, so again, a lot of things we've already touched on, the preserve, strengthen, enhance, transform. We've discussed these previously of what they are intended for. For those who are new this evening here in our back rows, we do have this in our meeting notes as well as our prior meetings with it spelled out a little bit further. As I already mentioned, the two topics we are discussing tonight is reviewing the original petitioner role as well as the expansion of uses and materials and design guidance in Newtown zoning. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and move into this very first question. So at our October meeting, it was at the end of October, we introduced the question. We talked about that we would be pushing this to the December meeting. So one, it would be in person. And two, we gave it the ample amount of time it deserved. You had requested at that time to see the results of the homework that had come in. So keep in mind, this homework came in the beginning of October, so kind of flushing that back out again. And the conclusions from the homework cases that we had shared previously is over 50% saying yes, an additional percentage saying yes with considerations, and others saying unsure, that there was nobody at that time who had said no, not to change the role. Additional responses with that is just needing some more information, consideration to identify the keeper of the plan. And we've heard this phrase in different, used in different ways between keeper of the plan, the gatekeeper, whether it's through DPZ, but just to share that in that terminology, as you've read things or heard things, you might have heard it in both ways as gatekeeper or keeper of the plan. I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with the words, because words do matter. And concerned that this role is no longer locally owned with a local vision, as the company that is now the corporation does not, their corporate headquarters are not within the state of Maryland, and that's what that was referring to. And then one of the other comments is there's still a process to go through for changes without the additional steps. So that was referring to the additional steps for any of the FDPs that needed to go through the original petitioner, because not every parcel does need to. And so that is what that one was referring to. So we're gonna just go through as we've done previously and really lay out what does all of this mean? What does that original petitioner role look like? And understanding the roles within zoning authority and the ability to make these changes. And that's come up as a request of who are all of the entities that are a part of this and are part of what can be done within zoning authority, who has the ability to make changes. There's a lot of them that you see on this list, and we're not going to dive into each and every single one of these, but really giving that high level to just make sure everybody understands, again, come back to that premise that not everybody who's a member of the task force has spent all their time in zoning. It's individuals here who represent the Newtown zoning district and really want to see what can be done with it for the betterment, for the future of it. So I'll touch on many of these between the county council, zoning board, going all the way through to the original petitioner role and Columbia Association. So within this, starting first with the county council and zoning board, and a lot of these sources, they are online. There's a lot of words on here. You're going to have access to this as always after this meeting on the website. But it really comes down to, for the Newtown zoning district, the preliminary development plan can be amended only by the zoning board following a public hearing. And the council members serve as the zoning board and serve really as the county's zoning authority. So wanting to make sure that connection is understood, that the council members serve as that zoning board, and that zoning board is the zoning authority, and they guide that future growth based on the general plan. And that preliminary development plan within Newtown zoning district can be amended only by the zoning board following a public hearing. And I know this is as clear as mud at times as we talk about all the different levels, which really starts coming back to one of our questions from last meeting when we talked about, should we be simplifying the process?
Can I ask a question? I mean, is this, I looked up, I just randomly used a couple of cities and it didn't seem like the county council being the zoning board is the norm. Granted, it was very anecdotal search. Is it kind of the norm, or is this something unique to our county?
I have seen it different ways. I've seen it at times where it is the council is the zoning. I've seen it at times where the council appoints the zoning board, but essentially the council still is responsible for the zoning board, because ultimately the zoning board in any arena is responsible for upholding what is that general plan, which lays out what should be done.
So Plan Howard Academy, for those that are online, really want to hear us, hear our voices, so I'll talk to it. Okay, so, the Plan Howard Academy, that exact question came up, and the answer given by the lawyer was that Howard County is unique in that respect, but it doesn't necessarily mean other communities don't have it, but we're just unique in that aspect, so.
And just as Kristen noted with the microphone, and we had some feedback from a task force member, why we have a microphone tonight is that the recording, which is serving as the meeting minutes to make sure that they're clear. And that's the purpose of the microphone, because I said the same exact thing. I project very well. I don't need a microphone, but I have one for when I start rambling away from the podium up here as well.
Yeah, and for the record, there are microphones in the ceiling, so they are supposedly trying to capture the voices. It's just, it's so-so.
And the only person who is online is Sarah. She could not be here in person, but she is joining us online. Thank you for that question. So, and to Kristen's point as well, when I'm thinking my experience with the county council also serving is a community in Texas that I have worked with previously. So the next is Department of Planning and Zoning. And again, this is just understanding the major roles when it comes to Newtown District is at the bottom of the page here, and that the Department of Planning and Zoning administers and regulates Section 125, which is that section of the zoning code that is our whole purpose of this task force, is looking at it, as well as administer and regulates the associated final development plans where applicable. And that where applicable is what we've talked about with the original petitioner role versus DPZ. It is not the same across all of those final development plans. And some of them are overseen by the Department of Planning and Zoning. Some of them are in other areas, need approval elsewhere first. So ultimately, DPZ is, putting together the comprehensive plans, the programs guiding the county's growth and development, and looking at the long-range policies for the land use, looking at really what that future direction is and how land use and zoning supports and ensures that the county's comprehensive plan can come to fruition. Everything does still have to go through public involvement in their process as they're looking through master planning and comprehensive planning and, the major zoning reevaluations on a regular basis. And then the planning board. So the planning board has 5 residents. So this is where it is nominated by the county executive and confirmed by the council. So you're seeing the trend of where the individuals who are in these roles, they're coming through still at that county executive, county council level, just as this task force was developed. This came from recommendations from county council members and appointed by the county executive. Overall, they're making recommendations on the petitions that are coming forward for rezoning. And when it comes to the Newtown District, the planning board has to approve that comprehensive sketch plan and final development plan. So that's what's going to the planning board. The site development plans are approved at the purview of the planning board. So again, we're talking about different levels. Through this, we've talked multiple times about those, the PDPs, the FDPs, all of the Ps, the plans, and who's having access on them. And the reason why we're going through this as it relates back to the original petitioner is making sure that, again, we all have that base understanding of who are all of the individuals and entities engaged in this process and anything to do with zoning and having zoning authority. So now we get to the one that is actually part of this question, the Newtown District original petitioner. And so this is the statement in here is the commercial or industrial properties within Newtown District boundaries outside of downtown Columbia and Village Center. So for those properties, only the original petitioner can request that amendment to the final development plan. And so that is where that conversation has come up of, as those properties want to be, at this point, redeveloped, it's needing to go to that original petitioner, as it's still called out. And that individual, the original petitioner then must accept what is coming to them to be able to move that forward. They're the only ones that can accept, or can request that amendment to the final development plan. So I'm gonna pause there just to make sure from, again, I know, many of you live here, you've lived through this, some of you do this for a living. But I wanna just make sure everybody's understanding the various roles here.
Question?
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you, Nicole.
Okay,
It was to explain it for everyone.
that's fine. I appreciate that because I didn't know why. The question is a little strange to me, or the statement, and I'm wondering if you can show on the map where this is supposedly applicable, because Newtown, okay, it's within the Newtown district boundaries, but outside of downtown Columbia and the village centers. So where is that?
Over residential. So.
Okay, the residential outside of downtown Columbia, is that what we're talking about?
So we're.
So that says for commercial or industrial.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Right, so original petitioner has the duty of, for residential properties, you as a property owner can apply to have an amendment just for the recording. So on the residential side, you can have a residential, somebody who owns a property, a residence, apply to amend a final development plan. The only limitation, the only application of the original petitioner is on the commercial side. So there are only commercial properties that cannot apply themselves for amending a final development plan.
But outside of downtown.
Outside of it, yes.
So, an example, right here in Owen Brown, there's a daycare center on Homespun, and that required a change to the FDP because that wasn't part of, I live in that wasn't part of our development. And so before they could build that, that's a commercial entity.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Was this always true? Like, did the original petitioner never, or like always? How do I say this? Like, did the original petitioner ever have to be involved in this commercial and industrial property rights amendment? Yeah. So, sorry, I'm figuring out how to phrase my question here.
You're good.
Like, was this changed at any point in time? Has the role of the original petitioner changed for residential, commercial, or industrial properties in the history of Newtown zoning? How about that? It seems like.
Yes, so there has been changes, and I'm sorry, my memory's not, I'm not remembering exactly what those exact changes were. I think it was for downtown, that was a change. And I can't remember if residential was always the case. But I do know that there have been changes over time. The original petitioner was originally Jim Rouse's Howard Research and Development Corporation. And the original petitioner role was there so that as Columbia was being developed out, they had full ability to make amendments to those final development plans. And then, so now, now that we're where we are with Columbia today, that role has slightly changed over the years, over the decades, to where it's, I think we've now mentioned, so it used to be the Rouse was the original petition, now it's currently held by Howard Hughes. Between there, it was General Growth Properties, was that? Yes, thank you. So it not only has the role itself transitioned over time, so has the actual original petitioner entity.
Okay, so at some point, the original petitioner had the responsibility to submit amendments for downtown Columbia and the village centers, but that was taken away such that now commercial properties in those areas can submit the amendments.
That is how I would understand it, yes, that those have morphed over time and downtown, village centers, residential, the original petitioner no longer has a role in those, it's only with the commercial. And industrial.
Just a different role.
Well,
Because they have private covenants.
covenants, so
Yes,
the covenants
yes.
are the other side of that, yeah,
Right, because,
Right.
you know,
so.
There's, oh, sorry. go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I mean, section 125 is what we're referring to here. So original petitioner is a defined, it's a term that is used in section 125. And so that is more or less the focus of what we're discussing.
okay, so that.
Yeah. Okay, can I just do one quick clarifying as we're going through this, because the next statement I pull up might help with some of our discussion as well. So trying to pull together a number of the questions, and thank you for working through the wording on that too. You know, I said Ashley looking, sorry, looking at the name tag right there, as Jeff noted, you know, the original petitioner and many of us have talked about over the course of the task force meetings, it was Jim Rouse. You know, he developed the grand plan. He put this plan into action, and very similar to how many developers still function with, you know, homeowner associations, so on a much smaller scale, is the developer controls everything until the last parcel is sold, and then it can turn over to an HOA or some other kind of gatekeeper. And so I use that as an example because sometimes people can think through that way of maybe you've lived elsewhere, you've had these, you know, HOA experiences, but that's that concept of it. So Jim Rouse created this. He had control over it as it was developing to make sure it developed according to this vision as it was filling in. The board right next to where Scott is sitting, you can see with that density, and we've talked about it, it's pretty much built out, you know, so as that's been going on, there have been changes. There's been amendments made, there's been master plans on the downtown Columbia. And, you know, so you have the two pieces, the role of the original petitioner as Jim Rouse then went to the company got, you know, transferred, purchased, etc. The entity known as the original petitioner, the entity that became that, you know, OP, changed with that. And the responsibilities over time as elements were changed as well. And there were zoning modifications made to section 125 through downtown Columbia and some other, you know, components. That also changed from the perspective of the final development plans. Now, separate from that, continue to be, and I know we've touched on them before, is covenants and how covenants function. And as we've talked about, there's you know, the example of covenants can be changed. You do have to get a lot of signatures and approvals. You know, that component of it, we're looking at here, those recommendations, the larger recommendations, not getting into all of the covenant conversations. So I wanted to give that overarching just to come back to that. And then David, your question.
So the change in the ability or whatever the capacity of the original petitioner is only as it relates to that. It has
Correct.
nothing to do with trying to limit or diminish their influence over what happens through the covenants.
Correct.
That's not on the table in this.
What we're talking about is as it's reflected in section 125. So thank you for that clarifying question as well. So it is a big
It's a good
one.
because you can do whatever you know, this is just a backstop, or the covenants are a backstop to that. People have the same rights in many cases under the covenants. So changing this without doing something on the covenants, I don't know, it's really a big discussion to have so much.
It's a step forward. Because without the change in the zoning, it's not going to be affected. I do want to just pull up this next line because I just,
say one other thing, you know, the county tried to limit that in 2010, rezoning that.
Mhm.
You know, restructure, and then again, 2016. They wanted to restructure the covenants, it never managed to get done. So everybody saw it coming.
right. And before we go to let me pull this up before we have you speak through, because I think this will also help influence our conversation. So we do have from HRD, so HRD, the original petitioner role, and County Department of Planning and Zoning have been working in conjunction, and coordinating, and having a lot of conversations. So their statement here is they do not, object. HRD does not, does not object to the elimination of the original petitioner role in the Newtown district. Now, that is subject, and this is there's the clauses in here, but question number one, do you have, have objection to this? So it does not object to the elimination of the original petitioner role in the Newtown district, subject to reviewing the implications with Department of Planning and Zoning to ensure that smooth transition.
Do they give up their rights under the covenants as well?
Well, I know you just showed up. I don't know if I can. So I was just bringing up, and we just got to show this on the screen of the conversations and the support the conversations that have occurred between the county and between HRD, specific to section 125 regarding the original petitioner, and that they, just reading it out as this is, and I did not know. Welcome, and
Yeah, sorry, I'm late. I had another thing to tend to prior to coming, but what did you say?
Oh, no, it was more just a rhetorical comment.
Okay.
That, by giving this up and still having the covenants, I don't know, it's really that anybody's really, it's more an administrative thing for them to have to do it.
Yes.
So
Right.
I'm sure that they have no objection to getting out of that role.
I mean, so that was their comment to us, to say they have no objection, obviously, to having that eliminated from it. So, I mean, I think that could be part of the conversations when we get to recommendations, and when they're here for those discussion points. They couldn't be here this evening. They had a conflict in their schedule, as you know, Christy, I think they had their holiday party this evening. So when we do get to recommendations, perhaps they could offer more to have as to what other thoughts they are thinking with regard to the original petition, all the other duties that come along.
And so I was gonna say, so just to note, we do have a few hands that were raised in order, so I wanna make sure that we do hit those in order. But I also wanna just go back to that, our role here on this task force is section 125 of the zoning code. Cause I know we kind of talk about a lot of things as it relates to that. And one of the things to think through is every time, you gotta start somewhere with change. And that somewhere can be, through section 125 or elsewhere. So I will turn it.
Thank you. I don't know that you will know the answer to this question. I've asked a number of people and nobody has been able to address it with any degree of assurance. Given the way Rouse was acquired by General Growth and they went through a bankruptcy, has anybody ever authenticated the legal transition
For
of
the most
that?
part. For the most part.
So it is,
A lot of money.
it's real, okay. Okay.
I mean, we haven't, we didn't exhaust every single, I mean, there's some weird things. Wasn't one that it was a Delaware and one of the entities, it was a little bit funky. But I think at the end of the day that we sort of concluded that they have the rights, that it survived.
That's interesting. So, well, I guess
But were you authenticated the rights from?
Under the covenants.
that
Yeah, so-
they are the legal successor to HRD.
That Howard Hughes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we think so, Deb.
Okay.
Great. And then we had a
But it's
question.
complicated.
Yes.
It's not super.
Right,
A
it-
million little entities, like
Mhm.
literally a million. No.
And with this
Dozens.
task force, with the question at hand of should we remove or modify or change, if that is removed or modified, it's still, whatever entity is the original petitioner is what we're referring to. Fran?
That brings up another question in my mind. Rouse or HRD was as subject to and reliant upon the covenants as all of the residents ascribe to them when they buy their properties. So
Not just the residents, city building owners.
And, right, so if they're willing to give it up, can they, what does that do to the covenants? If,
I think these are excellent ongoing conversations that as Department of Planning and Zoning is meeting with HRD, that comes into this conversation of subject to reviewing the implications. And so it's not one for this moment that we can identify. It's a great question to ask. It's not one in this moment that we can identify the repercussion or the answer to that. You again, coming back to that section 125 of if we strike it, should that be the direction that happens is, when we come back to the polling and developing recommendations, then I think that is a very, it's a very important question to ask. And one that might be as part of the recommendation is that needs to be continued to be coordinated and evaluated. And how that functions can be part of that. So when I go, so I'm sorry, so the question of can you come to the meetings of the developing recommendations? Yes, you're a task force member. Fran, you have been waiting patiently, thank
I
you.
think you said what I was gonna say is that reading between the lines, some other entity may take the next step. It may not be this group, but some other step, some other entity take the step to change the covenants, which would require set of things going on. You did, when you were doing your slides before, after the original petitioner, you said the Columbia Association still had a role.
I haven't gotten to that slide yet.
Okay, I want to know what that is before I
Okay.
answer. Thank you.
All right. So just the Columbia Association, they do not have zoning authority. They are included in this. And the reason that I wanted to make sure that they were included within this description is we often talk about Columbia Association as one of the entities that does have, as the dues and other elements in there. So it is a nonprofit community service corporation. And where they are very important is they're maintaining the nearly 3,600 acres of open space. And so that is of the 5,360 acres of total open space. So they're maintaining over half of the open space, which is the amenities, the lakes, the parks, the tot lots, basketball, tennis courts, 95 miles of pathways. So that is Columbia Association's role. But not as a zoning entity or zoning authority. Does that come back to a question for you? Because you were asking what is their role?
So do they look at it and say, oh, looks great, or they look at it and say, this is gonna cost me another $10,000 a year to deal with it? What is their role?
What is they're managing the amenities, and maintenance of it.
Just, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I've got a question here. Some time ago, HRD asked the CA to take over, or offered the CA the role of the original petitioner.
But they, for some reason, they turned it down. I don't know what the legal reasons were, but I sat in a meeting with both John DeWolf and Milton Matthews, and they talked about taking it over. So that would presumably mean that taking over the oversight of the commercial covenants and design guidelines.
That is something that at this time, I don't know that I have enough information, or we definitely want to look into that, because that's, as you said, at some time, that's something that was discussed.
Yes.
And I think that's worthy of additional discussion as everybody's having the coordination between the county and HRD regarding the original petitioner as well. But that's not something, that can be part of our developing recommendations. It's right now, the question that we are reviewing this information for is, do we want to keep, maintain, change, preserve, strengthen, enhance, or transform the role of original petitioner in section 125.
But what entities can actually take over the role of the original petitioner? Is there a list of different ideas? I mean, I presented what from both Newtown Task Force had different ideas, which ones can legally do that?
Which ones can legally do that?
Yeah.
I think that's one that at this time I'm not able to speak to. And I don't know if, Linda, you had anything?
I think that's part of what this discussion, we can
Yeah.
make recommendations, do we even need the original petitioner? I think that's the whole discussion point,
Yeah.
that it could go away.
Yeah, I think it's gonna go away, not have some questions, you just go directly to planning and zoning.
That you'll be making, when we get to that section, do we keep it?
What I would recommend, just go directly.
If we keep it, is it someone different? So that, those are all cards are on the table for this discussion.
But what happens to the things that you had in the architect guidelines and the oversight? What happens to that?
So several of those we'll talk about as the next question when we get to some of those other elements. And the thing to think about, and as Linda's pointed out as well, everything's open and on the table. So we can say, yeah, it's a great idea that there is this role of an entity, not Department of Planning and Zoning, of an entity who's in charge of this, not defining who that entity is.
Like a
We-
Columbia Planning Board, for example.
That could be part of that recommendation. And then to the question of the legal aspect of it, you know, the recommendations can be made and it is not expected that, you know, the research still will need to happen to identify how those recommendations can be implemented. So let's just say the recommendation is made that, Corporation XYZ is, they're suited for this. Everybody here thinks they're the perfect organization to take this on, that they become the original petitioner role. And then that recommendation is a recommendation. That will be in the report. Then the next step is this document goes to county council. They're going to look at it, identify what should or could, you know, identifying where that goes next. And then it'll be other entities to then identify and say, yep, that is legal. Let's go ahead and see how we implement it, or, you know, that's not really legal, but let's identify what would be. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Nicole, I saw your hand raised.
Are there more questions? Sorry. Are there, other than the one that you just put up there about the original petitioner, did you have more in here? Is that the only, it's the sole?
That's the sole discussion point tonight. Yep.
Because what I was wondering then is HRD, or Howard Hughes in this case, calls itself the preferred developer. Is that not something that's from this section of the zoning code?
No, it is only the original petitioner.
And solely at this point related to commercial and industrial properties outside of downtown Columbia and, okay,
Yes.
alrighty.
So again, understanding the roles within here, so looking at these different amendments, so only the original petitioner for the Newtown district may propose amendments to the approved comprehensive sketch plan or final development plan. And as noted, the exclusions of the residential downtown Columbia Village Center. So this really is just walking through that process again from the entities. It's kind of looking at from the process side versus the entity side. From the development regulations assessment, and these are those two papers that are part of the information that's within the virtual binders. So the development regulations assessment, it makes it, the current rule makes it difficult on property owners. And we had a case, thank you Fran for pointing out, with the daycare center that might be happening. And then on the Newtown white paper, the talks about when the regulations were created, HRD owned all of Columbia, so this definition of the petitioner made sense. It's a little bit of what we've talked about already of, you know, creating it and filling it out. It makes sense as having that one entity, but there are many they're non-residential landowners. So that can cause challenges, and that's what was noted in the Newtown white paper. In addition, here's where some of this, you know, there's the, they hold enforcement authority over more than 40 sets of separate and private covenants as well, which I know is you've brought up there. And most of these were executed as part of the terms for HRD sale of Newtown zoned lands. That's enabled them to control some of these components, such as the architectural characteristics. And finally, as you've talked about as well with the Newtown district petitioner, that term gatekeeper has been used several times, and I mentioned that in the beginning, so that as different individuals, and we've heard it through comments from some of you in emails, using gatekeeper, original petitioner, keeper of the plan, kind of interchangeably, so that's why it's important to note this. But it is not an actual defined term, original petitioner, not preferred developer, any of that. The original petitioner is the only defined term in the zoning regulations. So it's a lot of information, a lot of ways and entities that are incorporated within this. And before I run through some of these case studies, I know Linda wanted to grab a microphone or come on up here as well. And
So just really quickly, at 6:50, just for the record, Colin joined us.
Oh,
So we
wonderful.
do have a quorum. So now we can go back and take action and adopt the agenda and the minutes for this meeting. So if you wanted to go back and do that now, just before we move on any further, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank
Will
you,
do.
Jennifer. Yep,
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Colin, for joining virtually. So pause that, we'll come back, talk about the case studies, and then we'll do the actual polling and open it up for the further discussions above and beyond what we've been having so far. So running back through. There we go. Approval and discussion of meeting minutes, as we do officially have a quorum here. The task force number 5 meeting minutes were previously distributed as the recording, as we've done before. We'll need somebody to approve and second, and we'll vote aye or nay. Is there a motion to approve task force number 5 meeting minutes as distributed in the recording? Great,
Second.
thank you, Fran, for the second. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, please say nay. Motion passes. Thank you, Colin, as well, for raising your hand. All right, coming back through on the case studies. We've talked a little bit about this previously as well. So we've talked, we do have these 3 different case studies in Reston, Virginia, the original petitioner role, and you'll actually see in all 3 of them, there is no original petitioner role at this time. They do have other requirements in each of these different case study areas. So that is something important to note, that there's still those guide rails when it comes to the implementation. So in Reston, Virginia, they follow their PRC plan guidance and basically have anything would require a plan amendment, and that goes through their administrative approvals process. In Montgomery Village, Maryland, they do follow Euclidean zoning. So zoning or land use changes that are not currently permitted do need to follow the county council's zoning amendment process, just as any other zoning amendment would require. So what's within Montgomery Village does just follow the standard zoning amendment process. And likewise in Greenbelt, they also follow Euclidean zoning. And then the same thing, if it's not currently permitted under a given zone, they also need to follow the county council zoning amendment process for Prince George's County. So with that, we come back to that original question, which also was the homework question. So if you have your phone, go ahead and grab it. You can take a picture. I will come back to this in a moment because I need to activate it of should we keep, remove, or modify the role of the original petitioner. And if everybody looks like they've grabbed it real quick. So then let me switch this out so I can, so for online, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Let me at least get this going on here.
There's this commercial and industrial outside of downtown Columbia, and and outside the village centers.
So this doesn't break it down as residential or commercial, but so these, it's everything outside of the village centers, but in the hash. So this is all commercial.
Just please wait for the
This is
presenter to
commercial.
change slides.
This is commercial. Here's a little commercial.
I voted, but then it told me to wait.
There's
I did vote.
commercial.
Yeah, I'm seeing the votes here. Oh, yeah, you voted. The next slide is the next question.
Let's go for it.
Yes, and let me,
Should I do it again? Because mine hasn't.
No, she said that.
if you're saying please wait for the next slide, then that is simply, it's the next slide is the next question, which we haven't gotten to yet, but I am not seeing my stop sharing, so I can reshare the other button here. You don't mind helping out for a moment? Thank you. Sharing on here.
I've got a question while you're waiting. When
Absolutely.
you had those 3 case studies, so 3 case studies you found, none of them had an original petitioner. Did you try and find anywhere in a new town or throughout the United States any role where there was a?
They no longer have an original petitioner, and each of those, they had somebody who created it, just as Jim Rouse created. And no, we did not look beyond those 3 case studies.
So did you look at how they transitioned to another oversight entity?
Do we look at how they transition to another oversight entity? It is very similar in, as I talked about with like a homeowner association, basically as they were built out. They transitioned. We've had the information previously, and I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but I know in each of them, they went through a transition. Specifically, I want to say it was in Greenbelt, Maryland, because that was coming through under the federal action, and then it went to an organization, and then it went to going to Euclidean zoning. Yes.
I'm not comfortable in voting. And not, not that I want to disagree with you, but by way of the explanation, I don't, we can say that Jim Rouse created the role of the original petitioner, given that he was mandated by the then commissioners, Howard County, to do certain things in developing Columbia. And HRD was a joint venture of Connecticut General, the Rouse Company. I think Howard County was in on it too. Over the course of the last few weeks, I've been going back and trying to get my hands and read a lot of original documents. And I'm increasingly surprised by the number of things that came out of a commission in the late 50s and was reported to the people in the planning board of Howard County in the spring of 1960s. That is a roadmap for what Jim Rouse did several years later. I mean, these people at the county knew what they wanted this county to look like going forward. And a lot of things that through my life, my experience with in Columbia and with Mr. Rouse actually came from them and not from Mr. Rouse. So what this change might do, what this proposed change might do, and how it would affect me as a homeowner, resident, I'm not comfortable at this point, and I'm not comfortable saying that Mr. Rouse did that, what you ascribed to him.
Okay.
Establishing the
That is noted. So thank you for that. And we're still discussing this as it is called out, whoever holds that role of original petitioner and how that came to be. At this point in time, section 125 calls out the original petitioner. And that is what we're discussing. And this voting is this is the polling to identify as we get into those developing recommendations, conversations, how that should be implemented. And if there's additional recommendations that go with it, what those next step recommendations should be as well.
Just one clarification here. So if you want to remove the role of original petitioner, the current, is this a vote on we want to remove Howard Hughes from being the petitioner?
This is,
Or is it the whole idea?
this is how the question was posed, and I'll go through and we'll discuss what we're looking at on the screen here. How this question is posed is, should we remove or modify the role of the original petitioner? And so we have, as we've done before, and I'll ask for insight from each of the individuals who have answered. As you are comfortable sharing, this is the polling, this is not the actual recommendation. This is to help guide us in those developing recommendation discussions. So we do have 8 individuals who have opted and identified it as removal. And I'd like to hear from individuals why they have noted that. Brian, and then Michael, and then David. That way Scott knows where his steps are coming from next.
For the people that voted to get rid of it.
Correct.
Well, I tend to watch the planning board. A lot of the time, you guys in the county don't know, but I lurk virtually. And that's a pretty serious group. I'm very pleased with what they do. I may not always agree with them, but I think they do a good job. And I think they could do a good job for Columbia because they are a serious group. The second reason, without mentioning names in this venue, not everything is now owned by HRD, and there have been some big horrific fights in court because of that. And so I'm not sure that HRD is a independent, neutral observer of what is happening. And for that reason, I think we need to change it.
But isn't that just the
Michael?
problem with the question? Because what that sounds like she's answering.
I agree with what
Yeah, I'm
what
going to Michael
Fran was
first, then
saying,
David,
that
then I'll come to you.
it's just an anachronism that's left over from 60 years ago, from when we were transforming a bunch of farmland into a city that was all owned by one developer, and now that it's owned by a bunch of different people. This role just doesn't make sense anymore, and it should be democratized.
David, and then actually Tim, and then we'll come back over because Tim, we haven't heard from Tim yet either.
Yeah, same. It's just obsolete. Doesn't have
Okay.
a purpose anymore. And on top of that, you still got to get through the covenants. So until you're able to do something with covenants, doesn't really matter so much.
I mean, you guys have pretty much covered what I was thinking. And then I think I saw the Howard Hughes does not want to be the original petitioner. They didn't seem like they're, so why have it? And now we need something new or whatever we come up with.
So my reason for voting to keep it is to keep the entity, but it has to be someone different. Because we still need oversight, someone, just like you mentioned, on covenants, design guidelines, the very things that make Columbia look like Columbia.
And one of the things as we get into developing recommendations is, and I'll be really pushing the boundaries for everyone there, here we're still just discussing those initial thoughts, is what does oversight look like? Does oversight still need to be that role, or does it need to be, still need to be identified in that manner or identified in another way through a system that already exists? And those will be as we get into developing recommendations. Looking at our timing here, we had one individual who stated to modify. If that individual would care to share their thought processes for the modify.
That was me. I was just saying modify. I was torn between remove and modify because I wanted to be sure if we were removing it that we were considering what it got us and considering if we want a broader vision going forward, if there is a broader vision for how we should be developing in the future, that we're considering what we need to do to get there. Is what we have in place enough? Are the plans that we have outlined enough to guide that? Or do we need an entity, whoever it is, or some entity or something to kind of bring that together? Because I think one of the pluses in having a master developer look at the whole area and have a comprehensive vision is it kind of got us some of our, like you were saying, some of our uniqueness. And if there are things that we don't want to lose with our future going forward, if there are things that are important to us, we should, before removing it, really think about, I understand the practicality of removing it because it's cumbersome for developers and people trying to do things going forward to have to go through this person. But if we think about it, just a little, before you remove it, think about closely, what your vision is for the future and how you deal with that going forward. I do agree that it's a good idea to revisit this role. If we are removing it, we should be thinking about what's, when it's gone, what's in place to help you get your desired goal and vision.
Absolutely, and I am gonna kind of,
It's a question. more
it's
than
a question, great. And then we're gonna move on to our next topic, and I'll close this up with a few statements about
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the role of the petitioner is not to grant final approval, to not, it's to say, yes, I'll submit it, right? I mean, so
Yes.
I don't know that everybody understands that all of those other steps are still in place. This is
Mhm.
just, you gotta run it through them, and they can veto it before it even gets to the next steps. And so all of those other protections, they're still there, the 16-step process, the DAP,
And you
all of that
have
stuff.
all those other entities that are part of that
Correct.
approval process. That's what all those other slides were. So it's just, there's a lot of oversight already.
Yes, and that is something and I want to wrap this piece up as well as we go on to that next topic, is this, as we've been doing with each of these questions, it's to get a good feel, to think about it, when we talk about this in developing recommendations, are we mostly talking about it from, strengthening something, from keeping it as is, from modifying it, from removing it, all of those elements. When we talk about developing recommendations, that's gonna be exactly what we do. So if this is removed, what is that oversight? And one of the other pieces is, and one of our other questions, this is why it's an iterative process as we get through developing recommendations, is do we simplify the process? So making sure as we talk, do we simplify the process and we remove this, how does that still fit together? Where are the guide rails through this? So we will be going through on those recommendations, kind of, okay, let's talk about this component. Now, as we come back to this one, does it impact over here? Does it not? Can we still stick with that concurrence? Do we still have things accounted for in our recommendations? So these are all excellent points that everybody is bringing up. So I want to go ahead and get us back to our presentation and our next topic. As soon as it decides it wants to start. Is talking about the uses, materials, and design guidance. And the question that came from the homework assignment is actually what's in bold in 2B, of should there be an enhancement or expansion of material allowances and design guidance in the Newtown zoning code. So this really comes down to, let's forget how it is, like what do we want it to be in the future and how do we get there with this? The question that was added in, and when we get to the polling, we'll also be asking, was something to help kind of break apart, and should there be an enhancement or expansion of the uses? And so the uses being broken out, and that being examples of it being the age restricted adult housing, the missing middle, we've talked about mixed use development, we've talked about. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Jeff. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm going to give you the conclusions from the homework cases with the should there be an expansion of the uses, materials, and design guidance. The overwhelming response was yes, and yes with considerations, and nobody replied no, and several replied unsure. And some of the key points out of that was review and update/modernize to reflect new construction techniques. So we've really talked about that a number of times, is when these were developed, composite materials were not a thing. There are materials now that are much more environmentally sustainable, that are very different, and the techniques by which things can be constructed are very different, and those were not taken into account previously. Focus on simplification of the processes and the design guidance, not expansion. Review the FDPs on a regular basis every 5 years and update as necessary. And then comment was complete this at the county level, not within the Newtown district zoning. So that was the conclusions from the homework. And again, this homework was turned in advance of the November meeting and that we're discussing now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to walk through the background information, the case studies, and we'll come back to the polling question shortly.
First, I just want to acknowledge Sarah is online, and she was also an integral part in helping me develop this presentation. So if there are questions and something I can't quite answer, I will turn to Sarah to help me answer them. We're going to do another deep dive on into final development plans today and how they regulate the built environment and sort of what they don't regulate as well. In Newtown zoning, we have the following land uses that are defined in section 125. So we have residential, single family, low and medium density apartments. Apartments include both apartments and townhouse, single family attached townhomes. And then we also have the employment centers, which can be either commercial, industrial, and then village center, retail, and community services. And then, you know, just noting here too, there is a limited amount of mixed use that kind of happens in Columbia. There's a little bit amount that you'll find within certain village centers, and of course downtown Columbia. By and large, there's not a lot of mixed use environment. So Newtown is governed by the final development plans of the 126 or 68 final development plans that make up Columbia, as well as just some basic building codes that need to be adhered to. Your final development plans determine allowable land uses and bulk regulations. They also have limited design guidance written within them, within the FDPs. We'll go over that in a little bit. While earlier development incorporated some missing middle housing types, housing use types, land use requirements limit expansion of more affordable housing designs, such as duplexes or triplexes in single family areas. So this means if you were to look sort of at the earlier phases of Newtown, that's where you'd primarily find the housing types such as the cottage clusters, courts that were sprinkled around the single family housing. And then in Newtown's final development plan, the plans put an emphasis on open space and pedestrian pathways for maintaining communal cohesion. So what is not regulated by FDPs, you would not typically find within the FDPs any mention of modern sustainability requirements, nor references of innovative materials or universal design beyond what the state county codes require. However, I'll mention again later that that certain design criteria can be placed upon specialized uses, primarily gas stations that do mandate design. So here are some of the ways FDPs regulate building location. We wanted to demonstrate just very quickly what FDPs regulate in order to provide an orientation of what Newtown zoning regulates and controls. Essentially, this is the sandbox that we're playing in as the task force here when it comes to making recommendations on site and design. So the following slides will have direct requirements that you will commonly find throughout Newtown's final development plans. On this screen, you can see a residential and commercial screenshots taken directly from an existing final development plan. Again, one of the 268 final development plans that make up Columbia. In this instance, we have setback requirements for residential units that state, highlighted in yellow, no structure shall be located upon land devoted to single family low density or medium density land use within 20 feet of any 50-foot right of way or
nor within 30 feet of any 60-foot right of way. So that's just language. You would commonly find that even in zoning. This is from a final development plan, but in zoning as well, you would find that, you know, you would have setback requirements for structures from a right of way. And then for commercial instance, for industrial, we just plucked an example showing no structure shall be located 25 feet from any right of way, right? So these final development plans are placing structures and saying that these structures need to be placed at such a distance from a road right of way in order to be built. So on the final, so on this slide, you can see some examples of where final development plans will regulate building height. Again, we have residential and commercial examples. So for the residential uses, it states that no structure shall be more than 35 feet from the highest adjoining ground elevation. And I'll just also mention again, we're just plucking from one. It might be slightly different on a different final development plan. So just giving you a flavor of kind of what you would see as you would poke around and see, look at different final development plans. And then for industrial uses, no structure shall be constructed greater than 50 feet. So industrial is going to have a different height requirement than residential. Then, of course, we'll just run it through lot coverage. Lot coverage is the requirement that the amount of building coverage that can occur on a lot be limited by a percentage amount. So in the residential example, it states that in no event shall more than 30% of any lot developed with single-family residential purposes be covered by buildings or other major structures. So no more than 30% of that land can be used for structures. And then for industrial, it's a 50% requirement. So in very limited circumstances, there are FDPs that will apply a special site criteria to parcels with the intended purpose of prescribing design of a building and lot. This mostly applies to gas stations throughout Columbia, but not all criteria are exactly the same, making them a little bit difficult to administer. So pictured here, we have the FDP for Costco's gas station, just one that we plucked, where it stipulated the following requirements. So in here, you can see, yes, section B is talking about frontage. The parcel must have a minimum of 150 feet of frontage on a public-private road. It talks about setbacks, so there's a minimum of 15 feet for the main structure of the gas station, 15 feet from a right-of-way. The building style, this is where it gets the most descriptive in terms of talking about the actual materials and usage of any building in Columbia. So it says the main building, the pump island, and any other ancillary buildings shall be harmonious in design and adjacent development and appropriate to the character of the commercial area. Materials, textures, and colors shall be compatible with surrounding uses. And then it even mentions reflective and fluorescent material shall be prohibited. Actually, the section E here under a building. And then also, it's also going to do landscaping requirements. So landscaping, it has an 18% for this particular final development plan. This is more specific than what our landscape manuals would say. So in this instance, this site would have to adhere to this 18% rule. And then, of course, just like other our zoning regulations, we have off-street parking requirements, we have lighting requirements. This final development plan even stipulates operation times for this business. So, the design advisory panel review has a prescribed list of areas found in section 16 where they will review development plans in Columbia. So it's going to be the new town village centers, the downtown-wide design guidelines, and the downtown neighborhood design guidelines, as well as reviewing landscape manual and forest conservation manual, which would still apply. You may recall seeing this slide from a prior meeting. It just shows you a menu of possibilities when thinking about how zoning can function. which is not currently, these types are not currently applied in Howard County, but it is something to be looked at as a possibility. There is something called performance-based zoning, which sets measurable goals like traffic reduction, noise limits, or job creation, and allows for developers flexibility in how they meet those requirements, those goals. It shifts focus from land use categories to the actual impact on development. So the desired outcome essentially is design flexibility to meet those goals. You have incentive-based zoning, which offers developers bonuses like extra height, density, expedited approvals in exchange for public benefits like affordable housing, green space, or transit access. It encourages desired outcomes without imposing rigid rules. And so essentially the incentives equals more amenity. The more amenities offered grants more incentives. Again, density, parking reductions, things of like that. And then yes, and unlike traditional zoning form-based, codes regulate the look and feel of the built environment. It's about how buildings meet the street, making sure they contribute to a cohesive, high-quality public realm. The intent is to allow greater flexibility in the use of buildings, but by not requiring any to begin with. So it doesn't necessarily stipulate that a building has to be used in such a function, but effectively creating a built environment that it adheres to the desired outcomes. So form-based can also use a hybrid model as well. And it can include design requirements with some limited use categories. So there are examples you could point to nationally where there are more limiting scope of uses where the zone might allow those uses and then still apply certain design criteria. So again, the design focus goals are building design and character, be more prescriptive. So we'll briefly touch on our case studies again. So we've looked at these before. These communities are local to the area and were developed within a master planning framework, much like Columbia during the similar time period. Here we have Reston, where it was where it has the following types of uses found within it. So there's strong mixed use integration of residential, office, retail, and civic spaces. There's higher density apartments near metro stations, village centers, and community retail. And then with higher density, they also encourage a variety of housing types in transit station areas, or their TSAs, to incorporate missing middle housing types. Reston also has the following materials and design standards that regulate the built environment. So Fairfax County Urban Design Guidelines for transit-oriented development areas, they stipulate high quality materials for facades, landscaping, streetscape improvements in the TOD areas. Sustainability features include stormwater management, green roofs, and energy efficiency. And then, and so essentially with their high densities comes with an increased design guidelines. And then outside the transit station areas and missing middle areas, Reston does not have a lot of design guidance. Then we'll move on to Montgomery Village. The following types of uses can be found within Montgomery Village. Mixed use redevelopment in commercial residential town and commercial residential neighborhood zones. So these encourage a variety of housing types and transit corridors to incorporate missing middle housing types. So the missing middle housing is more spread out and not just in transit center areas like in Reston. The materials and design standards, there's an overlay zone that requires compatibility with existing character, preservation of open space and view sheds, and site plan approval for major projects with sustainability are highly encouraged. And as such, this means that zoning provides incentives for missing middle housing types, community amenities, and sustainable materials. Yes. So, and then finally, Greenbelt. Within Greenbelt, the following uses can be found. Very simply, residential, civic, and retail uses integrated into the historic core.
And then you have, for materials and design standards, you have neighborhood conservation overlay that mandates historic character, compatible materials and scale for new development is regulated. And notably, there isn't a ton of mixed use because again, it is trying to preserve its split of residential and historical core. And then just very quickly, here's an overview summary of the 3 cases with Columbia added as a comparison. Columbia, again, has residential employment centers, limited mixed use outside of downtown. And we were talking earlier, I think, about where are those commercial areas? So on that, right by Scott over there, we have the the preliminary development plan for Columbia. And primarily those areas are going to be in the purple on the map. And then, so from the materials and design standards, there's the built environment in Columbia is regulated through the different FDPs. These have basic land use codes that have limited incorporation of modern design standards, including sustainability and or materials. Again, that's really just only when we're really speaking to the gas stations. That's when design really kind of gets heightened on a final development plan. In Reston, there's a strong mixed-use built environment, particularly in the transit-oriented development areas. From a materials and design standard standpoint, the TOD, transit-oriented development guidelines, that require more premium materials and green sustainable features. And then with Montgomery Village, it's mostly residential with mixed use redevelopment. The materials and design standards, they have an incentive zoning structure, which provides bonuses for open space preservation and design enhancements and sustainability requirements. And then finally, Greenbelt. The Greenbelt, again, has residential with a civic core where the focus of preservation is on that core. And they also have design standards that are strict material guidelines for the historic character element of Greenbelt, but they do not have design guidelines outside of the historic guidelines. And with that, I will hand it back over to Jen.
So it is a lot of heavy information tonight. Before we get into the polling, Michael?
So up until now, we've been laser focused on things that are codified within section 125 of the zoning code. And I just want to make sure I understand what these questions are actually asking us about. Because based on what we just went through, it seems like you're more asking us questions about not anything that's explicitly delineated in the code, but more about things that are just the general uses within all the various FDPs. And so that's shifting things a little bit. And I just want to make sure that I understand and I'm conceptualizing that shift in what you're asking here.
That, or would you like me to?
Or a more simple way is like,
yes.
Could you relate that back to the zoning code, or am I correct in understanding that these regulations that you're referring to are really delineated within the FDPs and not at the zoning code level?
So yeah, I mean, the final development plans are going to specify what uses are allowed. So if you were to go through section 125, you're going to have prescribed land use types. Those land uses would tell you what is allowed within each section of those within each land use type. So I think what we're looking to do is ask the question of, are those land use types that we find within Columbia too limiting, or is there a way to expand the definition more in order to be able to provide more types of uses? Right now, for example, right here at the end, we talk about mixed use. You know, there's just not a lot of opportunities for mixed use. Is that something that this task force wants to consider, have more considerations for? There isn't a category for mixed use specifically. So is there an expansion of a new category perhaps that you might want to reconsider? Yeah.
But are those categories set in the zoning code rather than in the final development plans? That's my question.
So I think it's a little bit of both. So he took the case in point, Newtown's a little unique that way, so it's not true Euclidean zoning in
Right.
that respect. And I think, again, talking about all cards are on the table, that goes to, is Newtown working the way it should be working? So we have Newtown that has its allowable uses, but then we have these unique maps that are these FDPs throughout Newtown that then have zoning districts referred to from the code itself. So, you know, B1, B2, M1, M2, so all the uses that are allowed in there are allowed on this particular FDP. All the RSC uses that are allowed on this FDP. So what machination, choose your adventure. That's what we're asking you all to do and to look at as we go through these exercises. Is this working? Do we want to then say, let's look at this FDP. Instead, do we want to assign, well, we have this FDP and that's just a B1 district. Just make that B1, or do we want to keep that Newtown zoning? So when we look at the mapping portion, is the suggestion maybe to offer, do we want to change it to make Euclidean zoning, or do we want to keep this Newtown formation as it is? Or do we want to offer up Newtown as an overlay district? Or something different instead of making it so complex where you have to look at Newtown zoning, what the zoning allows, then what the FDP allows, and then what you can and can't do on it, and then what percentages are allowed within that. As opposed to, well, we know what these maps allow, let's just make that base zoning the Euclidean zone and allow the overlay, which would give the added protection and guardrails that we're seeking for that guidance, for those guidelines for architectural standards or some other type of design and review standards.
So I understand that. I have difficulty linking up what you just said with those two questions on the screen.
Okay.
Okay, right.
I'm
Well,
happy to jump in as well.
A little too far afield, but I was trying to relate it back to Sarah's.
And Sarah's also come on mine, but I just, Sarah, before you start, I just want to say thank you, Michael, for asking that question because it's very astute of, like I just went through the original petitioner question. Every time I'm like, it's section 125 and coming back to that. And you're right, this is there's not that like, right here, these are the exact words we're talking about. It is a much larger idea, as Linda had talked about, and I think Sarah will refer to as well. But I just wanted to acknowledge, thank you for raising that so that we can kind of, everybody can change their mindset a little bit on how we're discussing it. Sarah?
Thank you all, and thank you. I think that's a very good description, Jen, and that section 125 kind of defines the menu of uses that you might see on FDPs. So it might say, you know, you can have single family low density, or you could have apartments that are townhomes or apartments that are multifamily. But what the FDPs then do is they map those locations out as to where each of those is allowed, and then provides further design guidance associated with each of those. So one thing we heard from task force members in early conversations and stakeholder interviews was looking to have a zone that not only expands possible allowable uses, but might also modernize the zone or allowances for things like universal design, accessibility, or sustainable materials, or just generally design guidance. So that's where you'd really be looking at, you know, maybe it's done at the FDP level, but maybe we're bringing it up to that section 125 level to say, you know, maybe instead of section 125 as it is now, where it just defines the uses, we should have, you know, a menu of incentives that encourage universal design and that allow for an expansion of types of uses that then, you know, might be mapped in an FDP, or it might be kind of brought up to that section 125 level. You could also look at it from the FDP perspective, where section 125 might have an expanded definition of uses, and then that might be divvied out to your FDPs that also include, new types like age-restricted adult housing and more sustainable materials and accessibility incentives within the smaller FDPs as well. So it's kind of an interplay between both in how you could approach it, but both of those regulate the uses in the design. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And Fran was just noting, I have an example, so thank you,
So
Fran.
I happen to brought my FTP with me,
Oh,
or at least some of the pages. So there's a section called Permitted General Locations of Buildings and Structures, dash, section 125.c.3.d, and then something in parentheses. It specifically says what she had said, single family and low density, they must be 20 feet of any 50-foot, basically what she was saying a couple slides ago. The FTP goes through all of 125 and says how they're going to meet it. So I see it as, are we going to change the uses that we permit in 125? Because 125, for example, would not perhaps permit a duplex on a single family lot because of the setback specifically. So that's really what it's asking is, do you want to expand the uses? I see it of 125. And then if we say that, I think we have to talk about how we want to expand it. Does that help?
Well, I'd like to address the whole idea of whether the FDPs really work on the level of governance. Because you happen to pick Costco and you gave a detailed description of a gas station, and it took some time for you to give that. Well, with FDP 55, you won't find such a description, but they allowed Royal Farms to be built on the FDP. So this is where the problem comes in. How is that possible? Then there's another part of all design guidelines that says the purpose. And it says the primary objectives is establishing that the development guidelines are to protect property values, enhance the owner's investment by ensuring a well-planned and well-developed, maintained development, to make a significant, pleasing contribution to the area and the whole community by ensuring harmonious relationships to other buildings and sites in the centre, to minimise the disturbances, influences of neighbouring properties, to contribute to the good of working environment. That purpose really lays out just what makes Columbia special.
Thank you. Going to, and definitely hear that, but also want to have folks move on to the question 2A of should there be an enhancement or expansion of the uses? And then the slide after that will be the question 2B. So we'll hit question 2A first. Stop sharing here for a second and then pull up slide. You can always go to menti.com and put the code in too. So in each of these, and again, just in consideration of the time, because were two very heavy topics as well. We have in here as far as the enhancement or expansion of the uses, yes and yes with consideration. So just ask for maybe one individual who said yes with considerations. Michael, I was just looking in case there's anyone who hadn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I'm all for at the district level liberalizing the uses. What concerns me, like the considerations is a pretty huge caveat in this case, because liberalizing the uses within every single FDP across the board is definitely not something I think I would support.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so I will move to the next slide. So hopefully you still have your survey open. Should there be an enhancement? Do you need me to reshare the QR code?
Filling up.
Okay. Well, I will, I'm gonna stop for a moment on this screen and then share the other, just so that everybody has a chance. think David needs some more Butterfingers up here.
Got a bad angle.
I'm just like, that's not for the meeting minutes.
Just remember the candy.
All right, so then let me go back to our results here. And again, on this question of should there be an enhancement or expansion of the material allowances and design guidance? We have yes, yes with considerations, and not sure. So an individual who answered not sure, what further, perhaps further information?
So I answered not sure, and my reasoning is generally I support that we have nothing to do with the covenants with this task force, but specifically here, all of the covenants come with the restriction that you're subject to the Architectural Review Committee. So to double dip with these architectural restrictions, you know, if you're trying to satisfy these, you know, just in the office world, these design guidelines that were written in 2002 or 2003, and then you're trying to also satisfy new material guidelines written in 2025, there's going to be inherent major conflicts there.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's going to be a very good internal conversation as well. On yes with considerations, one individual, can we hear from one person who shared and what their considerations might be?
They were saying specific.
Sorry, we're talking to each other.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to share this out loud, then.
She's saying that it's saying we should expand the material allowances, and I think that's great. But generally, what I see when I read that is that they're going to require you to build more sustainably and with a lower carbon footprint, which is great, and I support that because I would like to live on this planet for the foreseeable future. But if there's no possible way to meet those guidelines while also meeting the guidelines from 2002, then just nothing's
When
going
you
to
have the
happen.
counties and then you go before the arc and then you get shot down by the arc.
Exactly.
Which I have experience with.
So part of the developing recommendations conversation will definitely need to include that and broaden that discussion and talk about how what a recommendation would be. And part of it could be reconcile this, like the recommendation is, yes, we want to do this, and this needs to be reconciled.
So, I mean, I know Howard Hughes explicitly said they would give up the original petitioner role, but they also did you ask them if they would give
That's
up
what I
the
said.
architectural
That's how we started this.
review role?
Not doing much.
Has that?
Or at least give up their role in appointing the members, right?
I think it's a conversation to have with them. I can't speak for them.
Yeah.
but yeah.
And that's why when you had asked that earlier, and David kind of asked it to me a little rhetorically.
We all know.
There's some other.
They fight for those roles.
And I think that is something really what we have at this time is a sentence that was shared. So, but I think these are continued conversations to move forward with.
But you mentioned that you've been in discussion with houses. Can you tell us what those discussions are?
I can't speak for them. I mean,
No, I don't mean for them.
Well, what we have is the result of those conversations, what we shared already.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Great.
There is a little bit of.
So,
There is a little bit of inherent distrust, you know, from, I think, from maybe more than just me in the room, the relationship between the county and Howard Hughes. So a recommendation for me would be for there to be increased transparency in those discussions.
Yeah, I second that.
again, thank you for bringing that up, just so that everybody is hearing the same thing and understanding where some of the comments are coming from as well. So I do want to, and I will go through these quickly only because of our time, and you'll receive these to really dig a little bit further into the survey analysis, but to share the results from all of our online survey #1 analysis, Some of these we've talked through before, as I've shared previously. This survey was open from October 6th through November 3rd and closed at 11:59 p.m. on November 3rd. We did have 399 respondents, which from an online survey perspective is very good. I always like to see more. I would love to see thousands and thousands. The only time I've ever gotten an online survey and a project to have over 2,000 was when the base commander of Norfolk Naval Station sent it out on our behalf and told his people to fill it out. So that's the only time I've ever gotten that type of number. However, we can still push. We'll have another survey later in this project process. We had previously discussed this of what is your relationship with Columbia, and you could provide multiple responses. So I live here, I shop here, I come here for entertainment, I work here. Predominant number of people who replied were living here. Question 1A was, if you live here, what village area do you live in? And so we noted before Hickory Ridge, Longreach Town Center were the predominant. Question 1B was, what types of entertainment do you enjoy? So if you're coming here, what do you enjoy doing the most? So restaurants, the mall, and parks and trails. With some of the other comments that came in, they were put in as hiking or meeting friends. So a lot of them already represented through here. Question 2, are you aware that the predominant zoning for the majority of Columbia's Newtown zoning? Almost just over 50%, 56% said yes, a little under that said no. And are you aware that Newtown zoning functions differently than the rest of Howard County zoning? And this is a statistical 50-50 split in this. What are the top 3 things you like about Newtown, Columbia? And so you can see the percentages in here, really the walkability, the bikeability, the green space, very much, and again, you could pick more than one in these. This was a first, second, third choice, but you're really seeing those trends. And a lot of what this is also doing is validating those vision statements that this task force came up with and developed at looking at recommendations. And then question 4, ranked. So this is really identifying of those who put first, second, and third, where it came through. So walkability, bikeability, green space, and then you see in here kind of where those first, second, and thirds came in. There's definitely that drop off. Question 5 of what do you see as the top 3 challenges in Newtown, Columbia? Traffic congestion is, definitely coming in as a high one, as is limited public transportation and safety concerns, as well as lack of affordable housing. So again, putting this into a ranking of that first, second, and third. This comes back to many of our conversations also of, do we have this housing type? Do we not have this housing type? And when you think about the people who are responding to this, they're responding based on what they're seeing from their viewpoint. So the lack of affordable housing, you always have to look at surveys too of the perception of it. So as I know in our conversations here, there was the discussion of there's a lot of mixes of affordability in housing. And that might not be the perception, and the responses on the surveys were that's a concern and what's lacking. Traffic congestion right up there as well, and limited public transportation. What features should be protected for the future? And I'll just go to the ranked on this. So really supporting the same things people like about it are the tree-lined streets and green spaces, community gathering places, the affordable housing as well, and then local businesses and the space for them. Question 7 really got into how do you feel about allowing more affordable housing? So these questions were set up purposefully. So if people were listing that in there, then it was, okay, so you're listing that, you're seeing this as a need. So how do you feel about it, in including Columbia? And as you can see, strongly support, very high, somewhat support, neutral. There are some that strongly oppose or somewhat oppose, but predominantly strongly supporting. Question 8 is a similar as it reflects back to the county general plan regarding mixed-use development, corridors, activity centers, including downtown Columbia, and how you feel about it. So again, you can see strongly support and somewhat support are the highest. Certainly there will always be individuals who somewhat oppose and strongly oppose, but you can see where the highest ranks are. And then question 9, which is most important to you? So this came back to that walkability, public transit access, parking availability, and then all are equally important. So we keep coming back to that same theme. I think we can all agree, walkability, bikeability, that multimodal mobility options throughout Newtown district areas is critically important. Question 10 is what are possible ways you see housing affordability in Newtown Columbia being improved through zoning changes? So affordability is a lot of things. This is not just one missing middle income or the affordable housing programs. And you can see there were options in here. The moderate income housing unit percentage requirements was one that we had as a topic here. Mixed use housing and missing middle housing types were definitely up on the chart as well. Question 11, are there parts of Newtown Columbia you think would benefit from redevelopment in particular? And then people could fill in. Most people said not sure on this, and on the yes, when it came down to what are those types of areas, a lot of it came back to looking at village centers and having some redevelopment throughout village center areas. And then question 12, are there parts of Newtown Columbia that you think should not be redeveloped, that they should remain as they are today? Again, most folks were saying not sure. With those who were saying yes, a lot of that came back to talking about, absolutely maintain anything that's historic, maintain the walkability, the bikeability. So it came back reflecting that of don't change those things that are certainly historic in nature and designated as such, and don't change the amount of parks and green space. Question 13 is imagine Newtown zoning district area 20 years from now, what would make it feel like a better place to live? A lot of things going in here, more than one answer could be selected. So these are not going to add up to 100 for those who are looking at some of the pie charts and saying, why is it not 100%? It's not intended to be. But you can see some of the main items in here, the stronger sense of community, safer streets and public spaces, better public transportation, more parks and green space. And when it's ranked, you can see them, the top 3 to 4, and really better public transportation and more parks and green space being right up there as well. Question 14, we touched on last time as well. This was really validating the vision statement. And so you can see in here which one was really appreciated the most: open space and green space aid and maintaining the spirit of Columbia. Question. Oh, there was one in here that was a complete enter. So question 16, whose voices do you think are missing from zoning discussions? So looking in here, you can see this was a great way to just acknowledge and note who might not be included. And so really appreciate that people shared this information. This is really just good to make sure each of us with that next survey, obviously the county, the project team, and each of you as task force members are asked to help put this out there into the community. So this will just be something that's really important to note. So we make sure we're really getting representation from everybody. How many years have you lived in the county? We've discussed this before. The majority of our respondents are 21, have lived in the county for over 21 years. And likewise, the majority of our respondents are over the age of 65. So very, very quick on the surveys. All of this will be part of it. The package, it'll be posted online so that you'll see this. Did want to provide a brief overview when we're talking about these developing recommendations and how we're looking to do this. So in January, which is our next meeting, at the end of January, you get a little reprieve from we've seen each other a lot from the end of October through now with the public meeting and some of our closer and scheduled task force meetings. But that will be our recommendations meeting. We'll review those meeting survey responses in more detail and we'll start drafting those recommendations. What does that look like? And we'll send out in advance that schedule of topics. What's the logical way? Because as we've noted, if we start talking about one item, it impacts another item. So there's logical ways such as, let's define the use of apartments. You provide the definition of apartments before we start talking about some of the densities and everything else. Because if we're going to recommend to change the use of apartments, that really needs to be reflected in everything we're doing. So that's just one idea. So that will be provided before in advance with the agenda coming into that next meeting. We'll continue in February to finalize those task force recommendations. And then in March will be our next public meeting and a task force meeting where we'll review that initial input from the public as well as, looking at everything that we are putting together for recommendations. April will finalize that recommendation. So keeping in mind back to that original schedule, it's back there. There's a slide coming up here shortly. That draft report will be ongoing as we get into March and an iterative process so that you're seeing it. We're simply writing down what's happened as part of this project process. When we get into the actual process, we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order, the light version, as we've talked about before. And we're really going to look at as a model of something that has worked recently and worked very well in the county is as the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, APFO task force was reviewing recommendations. The committee used a process, and that process was really going through, having the discussions, having votes, and then documenting kind of why somebody might not have voted. And so that's the process we're going to look at here. So with that, come back to that in a moment, the homework assignment to be completed no later than January 27th, which this is really, it is on you looking at this to complete. We're not collecting information from you, but reviewing that recommendations document, and we'll make sure we send a link out and an active link in the email. But reviewing that document so you understand the basis by which we're going to run the recommendations process. That'll be very important to do so we can just dive right into the activities. I'll kind of go through you again, our slide of where we are. We've talked about that. The key thing here is we're going to very quickly get into this overlap with the draft report. So just to note, it is very much an iterative process. Upcoming is more developing recommendations. Of course, our 2 recommendation development focused meetings, January 27th and February 17th. We'll take note of making sure there's calendar invites, certainly for the virtual so that you have the link, but also for the in-person, just as that reminder, as many of us live off of our calendars. Just based on the timing, I'm going to go to the very last slide and just say thank you very much. We won't see each other again until January, so I hope everyone has a very happy holiday, very safe holiday, and a happy new year. And we will see you next year.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, so much. And thank you for your additional 3 minutes.
Great, how are you doing?